Hey, welcome back to NBA Now and Then, the greatest comparisons. I am Uriah with another episode from our 50, 40, 90 interview series. And I have a special guest with me this evening. I am here with Jordan Treske. How you doing, Jordan?
Doing very well. How about you?
Hey, I'm feeling great. The NBA season has kicked off, in my opinion, on the court, the best of ways. All the off-court stuff, that'll work itself out, right?
Yes, I will.
Hopefully it'll work itself out.
Each day will be a new chapter, I guess.
It's always a new chapter. Look, NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, out of all four leagues, Jordan, I'm sure you can attest, NBA is, I think it's like 365 drama, right?
It's certainly, I feel like this offseason, I was kind of like, there's a lot of downtime, and I was kind of like looking forward to it. And then the Clippers stuff started percolating. And then I was like, oh, this is kind of, certainly out of left field. And then it has felt like there have been other things that can easily take you away from basketball that dominate our attention span, I guess.
Yeah. Well, between Giannis's hot start, Tyrese Maxey, and of course, Victor Wembanyama, there's a lot to get into when it comes to the players and the teams, and fans love it. And we're going to jump right into this episode with your interview. So I'm going to introduce Jordan right now. Jordan is the author of Building the Milwaukee Bucks from McFarland Books. He has written and podcasted about the Milwaukee Bucks for a decade. He's a host or a co-host of the Win in Six podcast alongside Adam McGee. You can find his work as part of the Gyro Step Podcast Network, where they cover the Bucks, the Brewers, and the Green Bay Packers as part of the Blue Wire Network. Whew, how'd I do, man? Was that good?
That was good. That was good.
Okay. Got to roll out the red carpet for our guest. Let's get into the first question, because we want this first half of the segment to be all about your book. Congratulations, by the way. This is your first book, correct?
Yes, it's my first book.
Awesome. The first question I have for you, Jordan, is what would you say motivated you to focus on the early years of the Bucks? And how did you decide on the specific time frame in players like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson?
So there's kind of two answers. I would say the short answer of like why I really plunged into looking at the original Bucks championship, if we want to call it that. It certainly helped that the Bucks won in 2021, and kind of this culmination of, I had written about the team for 6 to 7 years at that point, podcasted, and just kind of following that journey of like getting Giannis, drafting Giannis, trading for Chris Middleton and Brandon Knight, and just seeing like the team take baby steps and then bigger steps towards contending in the NBA, and really like becoming relevant again in the NBA. Like that was the biggest thing, is like, it wasn't just an NBA thing. It was also like a Milwaukee thing. It was like Wisconsin. Like the Bucks were kind of an afterthought for a long time because of how bad they were. And, we can go in the laundry list of bad decisions that kind of led to them being that like basement tier. So that was kind of seeing your favorite team do something that you never anticipated them doing, kind of just like sparked all this like joyous excitement and everything like that. And then to kind of go into why I wanted to write about the original championship team and focus on Kareem and focus on Oscar and just focus on the formation of the team, is that these are all stories that had been like coming around like the offseason. We'd always we do Bucks history months at Behind the Buck Pass. It's like the fan-sided Bucks page. And so it was like summertime where things are dead. It's August and September. We're waiting for training camp. Those stories kind of were like, I just like was so, I don't know, like every time or every year I'd just be really like looking forward to doing stuff like that. And then COVID happened. Basketball and life as we knew it went on pause. But I had to we had to kind of keep doing something. And we really plunged into like Bucks history, and that kind of like everything was in the air of like between that and then winning the championship 50 years after the first title. just there are a lot of things in motion that like kind of was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to keep doing this. And then, yeah, I just kept researching until it turned into a book.
Now, speaking of research, you highlight the interplay of team building, community identity, and some racial cultural dynamics in Milwaukee, which to me, I think is fascinating because, I'm from the Philly area and I don't really know much about Milwaukee outside of Giannis and the Packers and obviously some of the historic players that you cover. But in your opinion, during your research, what surprised you the most when you were discovering some of the factors that shaped the franchise's rapid rise?
It was super interesting to kind of see the connective tissue to everything. There's a lot of different ways I could kind of take it, but like when I would look at like old archival stuff, like through the Milwaukee Journal, through the Milwaukee Sentinel, which is now one paper. At the time, it was two.
Mm.
Reading like old Sports Illustrateds, like that kind of getting the temperature check and vibe of everything. The Braves had left Milwaukee in 1965, and when that happened, there was just a lot of things of just like how Milwaukee viewed itself, and like, sports is very big in Wisconsin and Milwaukee, and it, I don't know, I was just kind of like looking at like all these different things of like Milwaukee's reputation versus like the Green Bay Packers. Like Milwaukee's the biggest city in Wisconsin, yet they lose the Braves. At one point, the Bucks are kind of threatened to leave once or twice. And yet with Green Bay, because of the Packers are this long-standing franchise and they are community owned. Like, I don't know, just kind of looking at all these different things that like, I was really fascinated by the connective tissue of like the sports element. And then there was just the whole like society and how things changed over the course of the 60s as we get into the civil rights era and things that I knew independently of one another, that as I was like diving into old books or stuff written at the time, you start to see it all like come together. Whereas I think as history and time passes, you view it independently of one another, but it's like, no, this is all happening at the same time. So it's just like super interesting to see how, you could see how life affects, you and I, or would like people of the time. And then it's like sports, let's get, we want these kind of teams to represent like the best of the city. And I don't know, it's like, I couldn't it was this pull that just kept coming back and back, I would say. That makes sense.
Yeah, that time period, the 60s, 70s, that was pretty tumultuous when it comes to race relations. And you mentioned the Braves. And of course, Hank Aaron was playing for the Braves when he broke the all-time home run record. And from, I guess, in past research or just being a sports fan, some of the threats that he would receive if he touched that record. And then on the basketball side, you have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and obviously Oscar Robertson, very outspoken. So just that element itself to me is intriguing, the time period. I do want to ask you about some of the sources of your interview, because just interviewed Yaron Weitzman, and he interviewed over 300 people about the LeBron James era with the Lakers. On your side of covering the Bucks with your podcast and obviously writing a book, what would you say a source or an interview stands out to you that you would say made the biggest impact on your thinking when it comes to the franchise's early years? Can you give us a specific moment or something that maybe shifted your perspective or just enlightened you?
There's a lot. I mean, from a sports element, like looking through that lens, I mean, one of the Bucks founders, his name is Marvin Fishman, and he wrote a book called Bucking the Odds. It's out of print. You can find it on like eBay and like Amazon. And that is like the equivalent of like a Bucks Bible. It's not like a long book, but each page has like detail that I'm just like, I never knew that. I never knew that. I never knew that. Like, you're just like, I remember getting it, and I got this like signed copy too, that like when I bought it, there was no like, note of that at all. So it was like, it was signed by the expansion team for the
Wow,
Bucks. And I was
that's
like,
cool.
okay, yeah, it was like this little like kind of like, I guess like Easter egg, but that was like it's just so informative for me that I know Marin Fader, who she wrote a blurb for my book that I was like floored by, and it's crazy. But I remember she had listed it in her Giannis book. And I was like, where could you get that? Like, I was just like, what? Like, I didn't know this thing existed. And it was a lot of stuff like that. Like Kareem's first book, like he's written a lot of books over the years, but it's called Giant Steps. That was super like informative in how to like write about Kareem. Oscar's autobiography, which it's still relatively recent. You could probably pick it up at a library, but like any player autobiography with those two, bucking the odds. And then honestly, like it was like the Milwaukee books that like there's a lot of time frame specific books that are called like City with a Chance or The Salmo of the North that kind of talks about the civil rights era in Milwaukee at that time, that like when I was reading about it, I didn't think that it would land as much with me and writing about it. But like again, you kind of see these like things that like interlocked everything and like opened it up even more to tell the story about like the city. Oh, I'm forgetting another big one. Wayne Embry had a book called The Inside Game,
Okay.
and that came out in like 2004. So that's still like relatively recent. And that was, you know, he's the first black general manager. The Bucks. He was already the captain of the Bucks when they were the expansion team. They took him in the expansion draft, and he did want to come to Milwaukee. And he talks about like those early thoughts or feelings of like coming to the city and kind of being like it's right, before the 1968 election. There are George Wallace signs, which if people don't know who George Wallace is, he was like a famous segregationist. And over time, things like Wayne Embry kind of like warms up to the city, and he obviously grows in influence within the organization and then breaks barriers. But his book was just like that. That again was like another kind of slice of like getting both societal stuff and the Bucks sports stuff that like I don't know, that was probably as big of a book to influence like how I wanted to approach everything than I would say anything that I read over the last few years.
Yeah, that's fascinating. As a writer myself, obviously I write for the Sixers, or I had written for the Sixers for several years. But before that, I'd written a historical fiction novel, and I can relate to finding certain books that really open up your mind to things you had no idea ever existed. And you have that creative opportunity to infuse that into your own baby, your own book, so that Bucks fans around the country, around the world can say, oh, wow, I had no idea about that. But you were able to collect all of that and put that in your book. My next question has to do with the sports franchise aspect of your book. And what happens is in any professional sports franchise, sometimes building a team can oft get overlooked with business, political, or even social elements, as you mentioned earlier. How did you, Jordan, how did you balance telling the on-court story of Kareem and Oscar Robertson versus the off-court story, which is ownership decisions and civic factors?
My answer might vary day to day, where I think like, did I go too much on one or too much on the other? I don't know. But I think part of it is that Kareem and Oscar are just so you can't tell the history of the NBA without them. And so because Kareem specifically, I mean, we know of his feelings of Milwaukee and he moves on from Milwaukee. And to me, that's the tension that's there was also like why I wanted to write about it. Cause it was like, how well known was it that he wanted to leave and that he had kind of a finite time on being with the Bucks. And so the encore stuff was covering kind of his pro debut. And, he wins 3 MVP awards. He wins a title in 6 seasons. He's like, he basically writes the record books for the Bucks because he comes in at such, their second year. So the encore stuff was like, that stuff was kind of easier for me because I had written about it in, past iterations, but this is more fleshed out and trying to like, tell someone that may not be a Bucks fan or may not live in Milwaukee, like this is how good this person was or this is how good this team was. The awkward stuff, I mean, I didn't want to go overboard with it because you could kind of take people away, but
True.
it is just trying to find that right balance of like why did things get influenced and like how, for example, like the Bucks are kind of thought of as this dynasty when they get Kareem and Oscar. They win in 71. They don't win again, but they make the finals and then Oscar retires and then Kareem leaves. And it's like there are decisions that kind of contribute to all that fading out quickly. But because of time passing or, maybe things were just written about, it kind of gets lost to history. So it was just kind of like trying to like how we would talk about a team now, like why a team moves on from a player, maybe that leads to the dissolution of a championship team. I kind of wanted to kind of bring it into a current lens from that way of like the on-court stuff or the off-court stuff informing the on-court stuff, if that makes sense.
No, it's tricky because of the time period and the location. Milwaukee is a very unique geographic region for any sports fan in that area. In one of our episodes, Jordan, we did top NBA what ifs in history. What if Kobe Bryant was never traded to the Lakers for Vlade Divac? What if Len Bias did not overdose the day of his draft, right, or the night of his draft?
Yeah.
And one of the biggest what ifs, Jordan, had to do with Kareem. So I remember doing the research and his opportunity, actually the opportunity for the Nets, the New York Nets, to get him to the NBA or to the ABA was completely fumbled by, of all people, George Mikan.
Yep.
When he had $1 million check in his pocket, Kareem comes in, was representing himself, right? Didn't even need his parents because Kareem was kind of like Wemby with this maturity and this mentality. And they didn't even offer him the $1 million. He walked out. He signed, obviously, with the Bucks. And George Mikan was fired, or I don't know if he was terminated or if he quit, but
it was kind of like this, like, we move on party kind of thing.
Man, that and if I don't know if you knew this, but at the time there was a time period where Dr. J was with the Nets. So
yes,
Kareem and Dr. J on the same team.
Well, and Dr. J was drafted by the Bucks.
Yes, that too. That was crazy.
That was actually like the first article that I remember writing for like our Bucks History Month, and I'm just like, because it's like one of those like, bar trivia, kind of like, did you know, he was drafted by the Bucks, but he never played a game for him. And I remember like going into like why that happened, and it's a lot of boring minutia, like it's really just like court order stuff that but it is legal. Just like like legal matters, but it was just like. That was like the first thing I remember writing, like me, this like pushing 10 years ago now. But I was like, this is super fascinating. Just like what a crazy what if.
Such great details in the history, and your book is going to include a lot of it. So speaking of your book, it addresses how Milwaukee regained a big league identity through the Bucks. How do you assess the lasting legacy of that era for Milwaukee and for the actual franchise today?
I think, obviously, writing this book probably fleshed out more thoughts about it than I had initially. I think one, I don't know if the Bucks are around without that story, without the origin story that involves getting one of the greatest players, if not the greatest player to play in the NBA in basketball. Oscar Robertson's right there too. So just the fact, exactly. So it's like this kind of, the expansion era of the NBA is so fascinating, is that the league grows, way too big, way too fast. And they kind of paid for it because they just wanted more stability and want more money. All these NBA owners kind of like, the house wasn't in order of how they wanted to continue growing the business. And plus the ABA is right there, that they had to ward that off on top of trying to merge with them, on top of the players union blocking that. So a lot of different elements. But I think for me, it's like the Bucks are the greatest expansion story in the NBA because of landing Kareem, because they win as soon as they do from entering the league in 1968 and winning in 1971. I want to say 1966 is like the first year that, like, I think it's the Bulls, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Sonics come in at that time, or San Diego Rockets. That's what it is.
Okay.
They go from like 8 teams or 9 to 23 by 1980. So they're
Wow, that's huge.
and that
That's a
and
huge
it's a
growth.
lot. That's a lot of teams.
Yeah.
And that's including like the ABA, absorption or merger, whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
But it to me, like, how fast they get to success and winning a championship informs why people around here cared about the Bucks. Like, they built their traditions so early and had two of the greatest figures in the NBA ever, that it kind of become like a lifetime fan. Like, how I viewed the Bucks growing up was a lot different than if people view the Bucks 20 years before. You know what I mean? Like, they had prestige and tradition that I think helped regain eventually kind of like the black eye that Milwaukee got because the Braves left.
Mm.
And that was so interesting because they won the World Series in 1957. And, I not that far away from like where the Brewers play. And there's still a lot of like Braves, landmarks or kind of like insignia that they honor them with.
Sure.
And that still means a big deal. Like, it's crazy how big of a deal it means, even though like how much heartbreak and how much tumultuous, tumultuous things kind of went down to eventually let them leave. That, like, the Bucks being born, winning as early as they did, kind of helped rally everybody together and kind of, I don't know, regain their reputation as a good sports town, if that makes sense.
No, that makes all the sense in the world. And you mentioning the Bucks, their rapid rise coming into the league, I think you said in 68 and then winning in 71.
Yeah.
As a sports fan, and even though they're not from Milwaukee, you look at hockey, you look at Las Vegas, a couple years in, they're winning titles. Stick with baseball, Arizona Diamondbacks, they weren't in the league but so long and they end up in the World Series. The Florida Marlins, same thing. Basketball, Orlando Magic, they get into the league in the late 80s and they get Shaq and Penny in 2 years, right? So, but they didn't win a chip, of course, but they ascended as quickly as the Bucks did. But I want to get back to the process of your book being written. Were there any myths or widely believed facts about the Milwaukee Bucks that you found maybe needed correction or reevaluation in your book? Or what's one of those, and why would you say it matters?
I think I gave this a lot of thought. There weren't any, I don't think there's any widely believed myth,
Okay.
unfortunately, as much as I would love to have like a juicy answer.
Right.
I think the closest thing would be Dr. J, honestly. And even though the Bucks took him in the drafts and they had his NBA rights, he never showed any, like, he never at once was like, oh, I'll go to Milwaukee. Like, it was pretty clear that he was like, no, I'm going to go to Atlanta. Yeah, I mean, like, and obviously that got nixed because of his ABA contract, but that was kind of the biggest thing that I wanted to kind of find this like smoking gun or like thing that would be like, if only, he said this, like he wanted to. It's like there was, I think he even wrote about in his autobiography that came out like 2013 or something like that. He kind of, it's not as big of a section that I was anticipating. So it was just
Right.
kind of like, oh, okay.
Right.
But I think it was more, it can be painstaking of trying to keep like the timeline in order.
Hmm.
And a lot of these things too, I think post championship specifically, things just kind of lost the time because of people moving on. We like the NBA just wasn't reported on the same way that it is now. Like, unless if you have dedicated, you know, sports journalists and papers at the time, and it was on the same footing as it is now, clearly. And it probably helped that the Bucks were so good so early that they dedicated so much time and, I can't say enough about like the things I would find that kept me going, and just like, and every day that I went to the library, because the Milwaukee Public Library has all of, like, the archival newspaper clippings. And so I'd go to the library and I would find something, and like every time I was like, oh, okay, this is it. Like, this is the one thing. I'm like, I'm sorting through all these different things. Like, this is a good one. Like, this is something to kind of build around. But I think that it's a boring answer, but it's stuff like that. It's just like keeping things clean and kind of arranged in the way that it, honestly happened.
When it comes to your book, obviously it's about hoops, right? On the cover, you have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson, right? When it comes to sports history, people are going to flock because the Milwaukee Bucks have such a rich history, and you got Giannis playing there now, superstar. But the book obviously touches on broader themes like community, change, resilience. What audience beyond hardcore basketball fans do you hope to reach, and what do you hope they'll take away from this book?
I definitely wanted to, maybe because my bubble's not as big as I hope, but I definitely would just wanted to kind of write a book about Milwaukee. And there's a lot of good stuff on the pack. I mean, it's the Packers. I don't need to say anything more. Even the Brewers, the Brewers have gotten pretty good over the last few years, but their history and like their run to the 82 World Series is covered a lot. Like, that's kind of stamped in in memoriam, kind of, in a way. The Bucks just didn't have the same level of like books, and just kind of like, it's 1971, so you're not going to find like NBA finals coverage like we do now. Like,
Yeah, it's true.
there's very few clips, but like when they won, they sweep the Bullets in 71 in the finals. You can only see like the second half of it on YouTube. Like, I think
Oh,
I know, it's like they
yeah,
just didn't,
it's a bummer.
it speaks of the time, and how the NBA was prioritized at the time too. But I think from that sense, I just wanted to write about the Bucks and their place in Milwaukee history. And maybe it's something that, like, I certainly hope that if anybody that isn't from Milwaukee or isn't a Bucks fan, or why would you write about a team that isn't the Celtics or the Lakers or the Knicks or
Yeah,
even the
yeah.
Bulls? Like, I think for me, having followed the NBA for a very long time, is that there are a lot of good NBA books. I would say 80% of them are probably primarily player centric. And that's not a bad thing, but like, maybe that informs why we are so hooked onto the players rather than the teams themselves, if that makes sense.
Wow. That's I never thought of that. You just opened my eyes to it. I was like, wow, that's right. Every NBA book is like got the player on the cover, and it's about his life and his struggle, and that's what we consume because it's a star-driven league. And you come from a different angle, and now you're, I guess, not putting Milwaukee on the map, but you're giving the city, because you do touch on the other sports teams, you kind of give them a spotlight that they wouldn't normally get. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I love those books. Don't get me wrong. Like, I love
Yeah,
reading
yeah,
about
yeah, yeah,
Michael.
yeah, 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 yeah. I
But
get it.
I think that was my biggest takeaway of, like, we wouldn't necessarily call the Bucks a prestige franchise, but their early years, they butt up against a lot of, like, the 70s Knicks teams, the 74 Celtics, the Lakers, certainly. Like, they're kind of in that mix and as, like, viewed in the same esteem as those teams.
Hmm.
And because the NBA isn't what it is now, like, and things just changed, of course, too. And championships are won over a long period of time. But I just kind of wanted to kind of flesh it out and how it was viewed at the time.
Fair enough. And speaking of the Bucks currently, before we go into the NBA draft time machine, I have to ask you, what do you think about the Bucks this season? We're recording this October 30th, so they're doing pretty good. Giannis is tearing it up. So what do you think about the Bucks this season, and what do you see in the future with this team?
I mean, obviously it's good to have a hot start. I think they needed to get a hot start, to say the least.
Yeah.
it's obviously going to hinge on Giannis's long-term future. And for as much as Bucks fans are very, Shams Charania is reporting something, and there's going to be some Bucks fans in comments of like, why is it focused this way versus like Nikola Jokic or whatever. There's just a difference in that the Bucks haven't won a playoff series in 3 years. They've had some bad playoff losses. They've had a lot of personnel decisions like trading for Dame Lillard and that not working. And obviously that was contributed by his Achilles injury. They had to start from kind of not scratch per se, but really tear it down to rebuild it in a way that made it a competitive team. They're always going to have to kind of prove their allegiance towards building a winning team to Giannis. And I think ultimately playoff success is going to be the key that, ensures that he wants to stay here beyond each year and after. Because as much as I was basking in the glow of the 21 championship, like I'm already listening and, there's a lot of like Bucks player podcasts, like his brother has a podcast, and they're talking about the memories of the 21 title run. I was like, that's not that long ago. Like it's, it is just like, it's funny how that has kind of evolved to where like, remember when that happened? I was like, oh my God.
It's not that long ago. It's fresh off of COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's very basic, but if they can keep maintaining their success, making good moves, I think a lot of the offseason, not just additions like getting Miles Turner, but like keeping Gary Trent Jr., re-signing Ryan Rollins, he might be on the verge of a breakout year of some sort, re-signing AJ Green to an extension. They finally have like young talent that frankly, they had not been able to do through the draft because of bad picks and bad they're not going to get top players at pick 60 or pick 58 or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that they're on the right track. It's just a matter of can it all come together at a time when it matters most.
Yeah, I personally hope Giannis stays, not just for the city, but I think he just reminds me of, because of his productivity, longevity, his loyalty to the city of Milwaukee, is such a great story. When he was drafted and he was so thin, he was so raw, barely spoke English, and he was missing home, and then his father passed away. It's just to see him grow and as a family man is inspirational, and I would love to see him get that same aura and treatment that Kobe got staying with the Lakers, Steph Curry, Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas. You know the list, NBA history. So I hope, I mean, I'm a Giannis fan, if you could look behind me. So I hope he stays with Milwaukee.
This is the end of the first half of our interview with Jordan Treske. Come back tomorrow when Jordan enters the NBA draft time machine and chooses between two stars from different eras. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.